Have you ever caught yourself thinking, I just don't enjoy being around people like I used to, and then wondered what changed? If that thought stirred something in you, you're not alone. Many people in their 60s, 70s, and beyond find themselves slowly stepping back from the very social circles they once cherished. Not out of bitterness, not because they've stopped caring, but because something deep within has shifted. This quiet transformation isn't often talked about. It can feel confusing, even a little guilty, when you realize you'd rather spend time alone than make small talk at a dinner party or attend yet another family gathering filled with noise but lacking meaning. You might even ask yourself, what's wrong with me? But here's the truth, nothing is wrong. In fact, what you're experiencing may be one of the healthiest, wisest changes that comes with aging. As we grow older, we become more attuned to what truly fills us up and what quietly drains us. We've weathered heartbreaks, grown through decades of giving, and learned that not every connection is worth keeping. And through it all, something else begins to rise. Clarity, the kind that tells you your peace is sacred, your time is precious, your energy is worth protecting. In this article, we'll explore 6 deeply relatable and deeply human reasons why avoiding people as you age is not only common, but completely normal. Some may surprise you, others may feel like they were written just for you, but by the end you may find yourself not only understanding this change, but embracing it. So stay with us. This might be the most validating read you've had in a long time. Reason 1. The weight of past betrayals. By the time you've lived 7, 8, or even 9 decades, you've done more than just witness history. You've lived through a lifetime of relationships. Some were beautiful, others bittersweet, but all of them, in one way or another, left their mark. If you've noticed yourself pulling away from people lately, not returning phone calls, skipping invitations, or choosing solitude over socializing, there's a good chance it's not because you've lost your love for people. It may be because life has taught you to be more careful with who gets access to your heart. We don't talk enough about the emotional toll of time. As the years pass, we collect more than memories. We collect bruises, and not all of them fade. A friend who broke your trust, a relative who disappeared when you needed them most, a confidant who used your vulnerability against you. Often, it's not just one dramatic moment that drives us inward. It's the steady drip of small disappointments over years, even decades, that leaves us quietly guarded. Take Eleanor, for example. At 81, she remembers a time when her house was filled with laughter every weekend. Dinner parties, music, people she called family, even if they weren't related by blood. But things shifted. A close friend betrayed a secret. Others slowly stopped calling after her husband passed. There was no grand falling out, no shouting match, no slamming doors. Just a slow unraveling. And in that silence, Eleanor began to realize that peace felt better than pretending. Many older adults share that experience. You give, you trust, you open up, and sometimes it's not returned in kind. And so you learn, not out of spite, but out of wisdom. A kind of emotional shell forms, not to shut others out entirely, but to protect the most sacred parts of yourself. You stop offering up your deepest thoughts so freely. You become more reserved, not cold but cautious. And it's not because you're bitter, it's because you've been paying attention. You've seen how quickly people can change, how someone you once leaned on can suddenly vanish, how a lifelong friend can quietly become a stranger. And those experiences, especially when repeated, reshape the way you approach connection. You no longer look at what people say, you pay attention to how they make you feel. Do you feel safe when they're around, respected, understood? If the answer is no, you don't force it, you pull back. And that's not avoidance, it's emotional intelligence. Psychologists refer to this as relational fatigue. It's what happens when the cost of staying emotionally available starts to outweigh the joy of being connected. You may feel tired just thinking about having to explain yourself again. or opening up only to be dismissed. And if this resonates with you, know that it doesn't mean you've grown cold. It means you've lived, you've loved, you've been let down, and you've decided, quite reasonably, to be more discerning. And while others might not understand this quiet withdrawal, especially younger family members who haven't walked the same emotional miles, you do. You know what it feels like to pour love into people who don't pour it back. You know what it costs to forgive again and again. So now, instead of trying to keep every relationship afloat, you give yourself permission to let some go. Not with resentment, but with grace. Not with anger, but with the calm understanding that your heart is too valuable to keep offering to those who don't know how to hold it. If this sounds like your story, you're not alone. Many older adults carry emotional histories that have taught them to retreat, not because they don't care, but because they've learned to care more about themselves. And there is nothing selfish about that. In fact, it may be one of the clearest signs that you've grown wiser with time. So if you've started avoiding certain people or situations that used to be part of your routine, take a moment to ask yourself why. If the answer points back to pain, disappointment, or a sense that your presence isn't truly valued, know this: you're allowed to choose peace over pretense. You're allowed to say no without explaining. You're allowed to protect your heart, especially now when you've spent a lifetime learning how to use it. Reason 2. The craving for peace over small talk. As we move through the later chapters of life, something subtle but powerful begins to change. The need for constant conversation, the urge to fill silence with sound, starts to fade. After years of navigating crowded rooms, family gatherings, workplace meetings, and community events, you may suddenly find yourself craving something quieter, something simpler, not the buzz of banter, but the stillness of peace. And if that shift has surprised you, you're not alone. Many older adults who once thrived in social settings, who could work a room with charm and wit, now find those same settings exhausting, not because they've lost interest in people, but because their emotional energy has become more precious. Where once you may have tolerated idle chatter, light gossip, or conversation just for the sake of politeness, now it feels like a drain. You're not antisocial, you're just more aware of what truly nourishes you and what doesn't. Think of Harold, a 76-year-old retired salesman who used to thrive on conversation. His job demanded charisma. He was the first to arrive and the last to leave any event. But these days, Harold turns down most invitations that involve mingling or large gatherings. He's not bitter, he's not depressed. He just says, "I'm tired of talking just to talk." And behind that simple sentence lies a deeper truth. He's no longer interested in conversations that feel hollow. What's changed isn't your capacity to speak, it's your desire for meaning. You've spent a lifetime talking to people. Now you want to talk with people. You long for sincerity, for connection, for moments that feel real, not rehearsed. And when that kind of connection is rare, you begin to choose stillness over stimulation. Silence, once feared, becomes something else entirely: sacred. There is power in that realization. The quiet no longer feels empty. It feels restorative. You sit with your thoughts, sip a warm cup of tea, listen to the birds outside your window, and it's enough. No need to perform, no need to keep up appearances, no need to contribute to conversations that go nowhere and leave you feeling lonelier than when you arrived. This doesn't mean you've stopped caring about others. Quite the opposite. It means you've learned to value how you spend your time and with whom. You no longer say yes just because it's expected. You choose your company with care. You turn down invitations not out of rudeness, but out of respect for your own peace of mind. And here's something that may feel especially validating. There is dignity in that kind of discernment. When you were younger, it may have felt important to show up for everything, to be seen, to stay involved, to keep up. But now, there's no pressure to prove yourself through social performance. You've earned the right to be selective, to say no thank you without apology, to seek out the quiet corners of life where joy is quieter but deeper, where conversations are slower but more sincere, where you don't feel the need to explain who you are or defend how you feel. This shift can confuse others, especially those who haven't yet discovered the peace you now protect. They might ask if you're okay. They might assume you're lonely. They may wonder why you're not as social as you used to be. But here's the truth they may not understand yet. What looks like withdrawal is often just clarity. You've grown clear about what fills you up and what drains you. You no longer chase connection for the sake of connection. You don't need to be part of a crowd to feel whole. In fact, one quiet afternoon with a good book, a walk in the park, or a heartfelt one-on-one conversation can leave you more fulfilled than hours of surface-level small talk. And that isn't something to apologize for, it's something to honor. So if lately you found yourself choosing the calm of your own home over the clamor of a crowded room, don't second-guess it. You're not fading, you're refining. You're stepping into a stage of life where peace becomes a priority, and where silence isn't empty, but full of meaning. Reason 3, the feeling that people don't understand you anymore. After spending a lifetime building relationships, raising families, working hard, and adapting to a world that changes faster every year, there may come a quiet moment when you sit back, look around, and ask yourself, when did everything start to feel so different? It's not just the technology or the trends, it's the conversations, the values, the way people interact now. Somewhere along the way, the world began to move at a pace and in a direction that no longer feels familiar. And perhaps, most quietly of all, you've started to feel like you're no longer being seen for who you are or heard for what you have to say. This isn't an uncommon experience. In fact, it may be one of the most deeply felt reasons older adults begin to pull back socially, not out of resentment, but out of quiet exhaustion. You still have thoughts, memories, insights, and stories worth sharing, but more and more you find that when you speak, others don't truly listen. They nod politely, they check their phones, they smile and change the subject. It's not that people are being cruel, it's that they're distracted or disconnected. And over time, that disconnection begins to sting. Take Marie, a 79-year-old retired school teacher who spent her life guiding children, raising 5 kids of her own, volunteering in her community. She used to look forward to family get-togethers, to sitting with her grandkids or nieces and nephews, sharing stories about how things used to be. But these days, they barely ask, and when she talks, they seem more interested in finishing their text messages than hearing about her life. The result isn't dramatic, it's just quiet, a quiet withdrawal, a choice to speak less, to share less. Not because Marie's stories no longer matter, but because she's learned they may no longer be received. This kind of loneliness isn't about being physically alone, it's about being emotionally unseen. You may have people around you, family, neighbors, caregivers, but still feel invisible. You express a concern and get brushed off. You share a memory and it gets lost in the noise. And eventually, silence starts to feel safer than speaking up. Psychologists call this emotional invalidation, when your feelings or thoughts are minimized, dismissed, or ignored in subtle ways. And over time, it erodes your desire to connect. But here's something important to remember. Your voice still holds value, your experiences still carry weight, and just because the world around you moves too fast to notice doesn't mean you've lost your wisdom. What may be happening instead is this: you've simply outgrown certain conversations. What once felt fulfilling may now feel shallow. What once was connection now feels like misunderstanding. And rather than forcing your way into spaces where you feel overlooked, you've chosen to retreat to a space where you can simply be, where no one questions your pace, your values, or your memories. That space might be your favorite chair by the window. It might be time spent writing in a journal, tending to a garden, or listening to music from a time that still feels like home. In that space, you don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to compete for attention. You are known, if only by yourself. And sometimes, that's more comforting than any conversation. If you've found yourself drifting away from certain social circles, it may not be because you've changed too much. It may be because the people around you stopped meeting you where you are. And when connection starts to feel like effort instead of ease, it's only natural to seek peace in your own presence. So if you've grown quiet lately, if you've chosen distance over effort, don't mistake that for weakness. It's a sign of clarity. You still have so much to offer, perhaps not to everyone, but to the right people, in the right moments. And in the meantime, it's okay to hold your stories close until someone truly wants to hear them. Reason 4. The quiet fear of becoming a burden. If you've ever kept your needs to yourself, not because you didn't have any, but because you didn't want to trouble anyone, you already know this feeling. It's not sadness, it's not pride, it's something more subtle and more painful, the quiet fear of becoming a burden. For many older adults, this fear doesn't show up loudly. It doesn't always come with tears or dramatic moments. Instead, it whispers its way into daily life. You hesitate before picking up the phone. You second-guess asking for a ride to the doctor. You turn down an invitation not because you don't want to go, but because you worry someone might feel obligated to take you. And just like that, your world starts to shrink. Not from a lack of love, but from a deep desire not to interfere. It's a strange paradox. The more you love the people around you, the more reluctant you are to lean on them. Especially if you've spent most of your life being the strong one, the caregiver, the person others could rely on. The idea of now needing others, of asking for help instead of offering it, can feel foreign, even shameful. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because for decades, you've measured your value by your independence. Take Frank, an 84-year-old widower who used to spend every weekend with his daughter's family. He loved the noise, the grandkids, the feeling of being included. But after his mobility declined, he began saying no more often. When asked why, he said softly, "They've got their hands full. I don't want to be one more thing they have to manage." His daughter never made him feel unwelcome, but the fear that he might become an inconvenience overpowered his desire for connection. That's the thing about this fear. It doesn't always come from how others treat you. It often comes from the high standards you've set for yourself. You don't want your presence to feel like pressure. You don't want your needs to feel like a weight someone else has to carry. And so you stay quiet. You stay home. You stay behind, even when your heart wants to be with the people you love. And yet, here's the truth that often gets lost in that silence. The people who care about you don't see you as a burden. To them, your presence is not a problem, it's a privilege. They may not always say it perfectly, they may not always anticipate your needs, but if their love is real, they want to show up for you. They want to be there, not out of duty, but out of devotion. Still, the fear lingers. It shapes your choices in small, invisible ways. You wait until your pain becomes unbearable before asking for help. You brush off your emotions so no one has to deal with them. You decline offers that come from genuine love because you don't want to be in the way. This fear, while deeply human, can be isolating, and over time it can lead to emotional withdrawal. Not because you don't want connection, but because you've convinced yourself that needing others might cost them too much. But you are not a burden. You are a human being who has spent a lifetime giving, helping, nurturing, and being strong. If this chapter of your life requires receiving more than giving, that is not a weakness, it's a shift. And there's dignity in allowing others to care for you just as you've cared for so many before. So if you've pulled back from people, not out of anger, but out of worry that your presence might be too much, consider this. Your worth has never been tied to your independence. You deserve connection not because you're useful, but because you are you. And the people who truly love you will always make room for your stories, your struggles, and your beautiful, enduring presence. Reason 5. the quiet ending of old connections. Not all relationships end with a fight. Some don't end at all. Not in a dramatic, story-worthy way, they just fade. Slowly, quietly, almost without you noticing. At first you think it's just a busy season. A few missed phone calls, a lunch date that never got rescheduled. But time moves on, life keeps shifting, and one day you realize it's been months or even years since you last spoke. And the people who once filled your days, your calendar, your heart, are now just memories scattered across time. This kind of distance doesn't always hurt in an obvious way. Sometimes it feels peaceful, a natural closing of a chapter, but other times it carries a subtle ache, not because of a betrayal or misunderstanding, but because something that once felt so alive simply stopped growing. You think back on the long conversations, the shared milestones, the belly laughs and familiar routines, and you wonder, what happened? Did they change? Did I? Maybe both. Consider Ruth, a 73-year-old woman who used to walk every Sunday afternoon with her best friend from high school. They shared everything, stories from their marriages, joys and frustrations about raising kids, their dreams for retirement, but slowly those walks became less frequent, monthly, then yearly, then not at all. We still care about each other, Ruth says, but I think we've said all we needed to say. That realization can be both freeing and a little sad, because as we age, our lives shift, sometimes dramatically, sometimes quietly. People move, priorities evolve, health changes, and the friendships that were once anchored in shared seasons, raising families, working side by side, living nearby, can't always survive the transition into the next chapter. And so we begin to let go. Not in anger, but in quiet acceptance. Not with a goodbye, but with a gentle acknowledgement that the bond has run its course. This isn't something we talk about enough. There's an unspoken pressure in our culture to keep every friendship alive forever. But the truth is, not all relationships are meant to last a lifetime. Some serve us beautifully for a time, and then life moves on. When that happens, choosing distance isn't a failure, it's a form of growth. As we become older, we also become more discerning. We begin to ask different questions. Does this relationship still bring me joy? Do I feel energized after we talk or drained? Am I holding on to this person out of habit or out of genuine connection? And when the answers point toward distance, we often choose solitude, not because we're lonely, but because we're learning to honor our inner needs. This doesn't mean we stop caring. Many of these friendships end in love, not resentment. We still wish each other well, we still remember the good times. But we also recognize that not every story has to stay in our present just because it lived in our past. In truth, letting go of old connections can be one of the most courageous and compassionate things we do. It makes room for reflection, for peace, and sometimes even for new kinds of relationships that match who we are today, not who we were 20 or 30 years ago. So if you found yourself pulling back from someone you used to speak with every week, if you felt a sense of loss that isn't rooted in conflict, but in quiet change, know that you're not alone. You're not giving up, you're growing. You're learning to value your time, your energy, your emotional space. You're learning that not all closeness is connection, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. And that's not something to grieve, it's something to respect. Reason 6. The joy of your own company. At some point in life, often quietly, without fanfare, you stop chasing crowds. You stop filling your calendar. You stop feeling guilty for wanting time to yourself, and instead, something else begins to grow. A deep, quiet appreciation for your own company. It doesn't happen all at once. For many, this shift begins gradually. A skipped event here, a canceled lunch there. You start choosing your own porch over someone else's party. You begin to realize that silence isn't something to fill, it's something to cherish. And for the first time in a long time, you feel a kind of peace that doesn't depend on anyone else showing up. This isn't sadness, it's not loneliness, it's contentment. Gerald, an 82-year-old who once hosted the loudest, liveliest gatherings on the block, now finds more joy watching the birds in his backyard than throwing dinner parties. "I've got enough stories in my head to keep me company for days," he laughs, and he means it. What used to feel like isolation now feels like freedom. There's something powerful about no longer needing to be available to everyone all the time. After years of being a parent, a partner, a coworker, a neighbor, after decades of being pulled in every direction, you begin to realize how rare and sacred your own space is, your time, your thoughts, your rhythm, and you stop apologizing for protecting it. For much of your life, your worth may have felt tied to how much you gave, how often you showed up, how many people you could care for, support, entertain. But now you understand that being on all the time isn't a requirement, it's a choice. And it's perfectly okay to choose rest, to choose quiet, to choose you. Others may not always understand. They may worry. They may ask if you're lonely or if something's wrong, because in a world that celebrates busyness and connection, choosing solitude can be misread as withdrawal. But you know better. What you've chosen isn't absence. It's alignment. You've aligned your life with what genuinely fills you up. And sometimes that doesn't include anyone else. A long walk at your own pace, an afternoon with a good book, cooking a meal just the way you like it, listening to music that brings back memories. These moments may seem small to others, but to you, they're everything, because they're real, they're yours, and they ask nothing of you but to simply be. That's the gift of aging, the ability to finally stop performing, proving, and pleasing. The ability to sit in your own skin, in your own home, in your own presence, and feel not alone, but complete. This is where healing happens, where reflection deepens, where your truest self has space to breathe. There's no pressure to explain yourself, no need to compete for attention, no more striving to keep up with anyone else's pace. You've earned the right to slow down, to savor, to live quietly, deeply, and with intention. So if you've been spending more time on your own lately, don't second guess it. It doesn't mean you're fading away. It means you found something many people spend their whole lives chasing: peace. Your joy no longer depends on crowds, on constant plans, on being surrounded. It comes from knowing who you are, what you need, and giving yourself permission to live in a way that honors both. You are not withdrawing, you are arriving fully, finally, at yourself. So now, perhaps, some of your quiet choices make more sense. Maybe you've felt it for a while, that subtle shift, that growing desire for peace over noise, for real connection over casual company, for space over obligation. And maybe, just maybe, you've been wondering what it all means. The truth is, this isn't a sign that you're fading or becoming less. It's a sign that you're becoming more clear, more grounded, more attuned to what truly matters in this season of life. Avoiding certain people doesn't make you antisocial. Choosing solitude doesn't mean you're giving up. What it does mean is that you've lived long enough, loved deep enough, and been let down often enough to understand something that only time can teach. Not everyone deserves access to your energy, your stories, or your heart. You've earned the right to protect your peace, to spend your days in ways that feel fulfilling, to let go of relationships that no longer serve your spirit, and to fully enjoy your own company, without guilt, without apology. So if you've been pulling away lately, from events, from people, from the old version of yourself that always said yes, know this: You are not broken. You are not bitter. You are becoming. And you are far from alone. There are countless others walking this same quiet path, choosing peace over pretense, meaning over mingling, depth over distraction. Your story, your feelings, your wisdom, they matter more than ever. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Which part of this journey resonated most deeply with you? Have you experienced any of these changes in your own life? Please take a moment to leave a comment below and share your reflections. Your words may be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this video spoke to you, if it made you feel seen, understood, or simply reminded you that you're not alone, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. Click the bell so you don't miss future content crafted just for you, your experiences, and your stage of life. Thank you for being here. Thank you for honoring your own journey. We're grateful to walk alongside you, even if it's in quiet, meaningful ways.